Sometimes the cruelest prison is built, not from iron bars, but from whispered words and sideways glances that follow you through every door. Margaret Fletcher had learned this truth in the hardest way possible, carrying the weight of scandal and poverty through the dusty streets of Millbrook Valley like invisible shackles that grew heavier with each passing day. At 28, she possessed an education that rivaled any man in the territory, speaking 3 languages fluently and holding certificates in mathematics, literature, and natural sciences from the prestigious Wellesley Female Seminary back east. Yet here she stood, clutching her last 50 cents while the town's respectable ladies crossed the street to avoid acknowledging her existence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the wooden sidewalks as Margaret made her way toward the general store, her worn black dress carefully mended, but unable to hide the frayed edges that spoke of months without steady income. Her late husband's gambling debts had consumed everything, leaving her with nothing but a sharp mind and a reputation tainted by association with his failures. The territory's unforgiving social code had branded her as damaged goods, a woman whose circumstances made her unsuitable for polite company despite her refinement and intelligence. She had tried everything, offering tutoring services to families who suddenly remembered pressing engagements, applying for teaching positions that mysteriously filled before she could be considered, and watching opportunities slip away like water through her fingers. Victoria Pemberton's voice carried across the town square with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention and obedience from lesser mortals. The widow of the territory's former lieutenant governor, she had transformed her political connections and inherited wealth into an empire of social influence that could make or break reputations with a single raised eyebrow. Margaret paused in her walking, recognizing the unmistakable tone of someone discussing her latest failure to secure employment at the territorial school board. The conversation stopped abruptly when Victoria noticed her approach, replaced by the kind of pointed silence that cut deeper than any spoken insult. The advertisement in the Millbrook Valley Herald seemed to glow with possibility against the yellowed newspaper Margaret had rescued from the trash behind Wright's Mercantile. Seeking educated governess for 2 young boys on working cattle ranch. Must possess strong moral character, teaching experience preferred but not required. Generous compensation for suitable candidate. Inquire at Harrison Ranch, 15 miles northwest of town. She read the words 3 times, hardly daring to believe that such an opportunity existed in a place where she had been systematically excluded from every respectable position. James Harrison commanded respect in Millbrook Valley, not through inherited position or political maneuvering, but through the quiet authority that came from building something substantial with his own hands. His ranch sprawled across 8,000 acres of prime grazing land, supporting nearly 3,000 head of cattle and employing 24 men who would follow him into any storm or conflict without question. At 35, he possessed the weathered handsomeness of a man who spent his days under the open sky, with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see everything and judge little. His reputation for fairness in business dealing and his genuine concern for his workers' welfare had earned him the respect of every honest person in the territory, while his substantial wealth made him the most eligible bachelor for 3 counties around. The death of his wife 3 years earlier in a riding accident had left him struggling to balance the demands of running a massive ranch operation with raising 2 young sons who desperately needed guidance and education. Timothy, at 12, was beginning to show the rebellious streak that came from too much freedom and too little structured learning, while 8-year-old Daniel remained withdrawn and sad, still mourning his mother in ways that broke his father's heart. James had tried hiring teachers from Denver and Colorado Springs, but none had lasted more than a few months in the isolation of ranch life, leaving him increasingly desperate for someone who could provide both education and maternal influence for his boys. Margaret approached the ranch house with her heart hammering against her ribs, fully aware that this represented her final chance for respectable employment before her meager savings ran out completely. The building itself spoke of prosperity and taste, a sprawling 2-story structure built from local stone and timber, with wide porches and carefully tended gardens that suggested a woman's touch still lingered despite the tragedy that had befallen the family. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress and checked her appearance in the reflection of the front window, knowing that first impressions would determine whether she returned to town with hope or despair. James Harrison answered the door himself, his imposing height and broad shoulders filling the doorframe as he studied her with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to look straight through surface appearances to something deeper underneath. Margaret had prepared herself for dismissal based on her circumstances, for the same polite rejection she had received from every other potential employer in the territory. She found herself invited into a comfortable parlor where he listened with genuine attention as she outlined her qualifications and experience, asking thoughtful questions about her teaching philosophy and her understanding of child development that revealed his own intelligence and concern for his son's welfare. The interview took an unexpected turn when Timothy and Daniel burst through the front door, their clothes muddy from some outdoor adventure and their faces bright with the kind of mischief that spoke of too much unsupervised freedom. James introduced them with obvious pride tinged by concern, and Margaret watched as the boys sized her up with the frank curiosity of children who had learned to be wary of adults promising to improve their lives. Timothy challenged her immediately, with a complex mathematical problem he had obviously prepared as a test, while Daniel hung back shyly, studying her with intelligent dark eyes that reminded her painfully of her own lost childhood. Margaret's response surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Instead of simply solving Timothy's mathematical challenge, she turned it into an engaging lesson about practical applications of geometry and ranch management, using examples that both boys could relate to their daily lives. She drew diagrams on a piece of paper, showing how mathematical principles governed everything from calculating feed requirements for cattle to determining the optimal placement of fence posts for maximum efficiency. Daniel's shyness began to melt as she included him in the discussion, asking his opinion and treating his contributions with the same respect she showed his older brother. The transformation in both boys was immediate and remarkable. Timothy's defense. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Defensive attitude softened as he realized that Margaret wasn't trying to impose arbitrary academic exercises, but rather helping him understand how learning could enhance his understanding of the world he already loved. Daniel emerged from his shell as Margaret's gentle encouragement drew out his natural curiosity about the ranch operations he observed, but had never fully understood. James watched this interaction with growing amazement, seeing his sons respond to teaching with an enthusiasm they had never shown for their previous tutors. When Margaret mentioned her knowledge of natural sciences and her particular interest in animal husbandry, James found himself revealing concerns about his cattle breeding program that he had never discussed with previous governess candidates. Her questions were insightful, and her suggestions practical, demonstrating an understanding of ranch operations that went far beyond what he had expected from someone with her educational background. She spoke knowledgeably about genetic selection, nutritional requirements, and disease prevention in ways that impressed him as much as her obvious teaching abilities. The boys' obvious excitement about the prospect of learning from Margaret made James's decision easier, but it was her genuine warmth and natural authority that convinced him she could provide the stability and guidance his sons desperately needed. When he offered her the position with a salary that exceeded her most optimistic expectations, Margaret felt tears of relief threaten to spill over despite her efforts to maintain professional composure. For the first time in months, she could see a future that didn't involve choosing between dignity and survival. However, James's next words caught her completely off guard, transforming what she thought was a straightforward employment opportunity into something far more complex and potentially scandalous. After discussing her duties as governess and the practical arrangements of living at the ranch, he hesitated for a moment before speaking with the directness that characterized all his important decisions. He needed more than just a teacher for his boys, he explained carefully. He needed a partner who could help him create a real home again, someone who could be both mother to his children and wife to himself. The proposal was presented with businesslike clarity that didn't diminish its shocking nature. James outlined the practical advantages of such an arrangement, speaking of companionship, shared responsibilities, and the benefits to his sons of having a stable family structure. He made it clear that he wasn't expecting romantic love, but rather a partnership built on mutual respect and shared commitment to his children's welfare. The financial security would be substantial, the social position respectable, and the opportunity to make a meaningful difference in young lives undeniable. Margaret sat in stunned silence as the implications washed over her. Marriage to James Harrison would solve every problem that had plagued her since her husband's death, providing security, purpose, and an escape from the social exile that had made her life unbearable. Yet accepting such an offer would require her to abandon any dreams of romantic love and enter into a relationship that was essentially a business transaction, albeit one with profound emotional stakes for the children involved. The practical considerations were compelling beyond denial. As James Harrison's wife, she would command respect throughout the territory, her past troubles forgotten in the face of her new status as mistress of one of the region's most successful ranches. She would have the resources to pursue her intellectual interests, access to books and educational materials that had been beyond her reach for months. Most importantly, she would have the opportunity to shape young minds and perhaps heal the emotional wounds that both boys still carried from their mother's death. James waited patiently for her response, his expression revealing nothing of what he hoped to hear, while making it clear that he would accept whatever decision she made without resentment or pressure. This consideration touched Margaret deeply, representing a stark contrast to the way most men in her experience approached interactions with women they perceived as vulnerable or desperate. He was offering her a choice rather than exploitation, partnership rather than charity, and the chance to rebuild her life on a foundation of mutual benefit rather than dependence. The weight of the decision pressed down on Margaret as she considered not just her immediate circumstances, but the long-term implications of accepting or rejecting such an offer. Refusal would mean returning to town with empty pockets and no prospects, facing the gradual erosion of her remaining dignity as poverty forced her into increasingly desperate circumstances. Acceptance would mean entering marriage without love, but with the possibility of creating something meaningful and lasting that could benefit everyone involved. Looking at Timothy and Daniel, who were watching her with hopeful expressions that they tried to hide behind studied casualness, Margaret felt her heart make the decision that her mind had been struggling to reach. These boys needed her, not just as a teacher but as someone who could help them heal from their loss and grow into the kind of men their father's example could inspire them to become. James Harrison was offering her not just security and status, but the chance to be part of something larger than her own survival. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to undertake. She accepted both positions, as governess and as wife, with the understanding that their marriage would be a partnership of practical necessity that might, with time and shared experience, develop into something deeper and more meaningful. James's relief was evident despite his controlled demeanor, and the boys' excitement was infectious as they began planning all the things they wanted to show her and learn from her. The arrangements were made with the same businesslike efficiency that James brought to all his important decisions. They would marry within the week, giving Margaret time to settle her affairs in town and prepare for her new life at the ranch. The wedding would be simple and practical, attended by necessary witnesses, but without the elaborate celebrations that neither of them felt appropriate, given the circumstances of their union. James assured her that he would handle any social complications that might arise from their unusual arrangement, using his influence and reputation to shield her from gossip or speculation about their relationship. As Margaret rode back to town that evening to collect her few belongings and notify her landlord of her departure, she felt the burden of uncertainty lifting from her shoulders for the first time in months. The future remained unknown, but it no longer seemed impossibly bleak. She had found not just employment, but an opportunity to build something meaningful from the ruins of her previous life. The whispers and sideways glances that had followed her through Millbrook Valley's streets would soon be replaced by the respect accorded to Mrs. James Harrison, and her skills and intelligence would finally have an outlet worthy of their potential. Yet even as relief flooded through her, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that her troubles were far from over. Victoria Pemberton's influence extended throughout the territory's social circles, and the news of James Harrison's sudden marriage to the scandalous widow would undoubtedly provoke reactions that could complicate her new life in ways she hadn't yet imagined. The battle for her dignity and place in the world had been won, but the war for acceptance and respect was only beginning. The news of James Harrison's engagement spread through Millbrook Valley like wildfire through dry prairie grass, igniting conversations in every parlor, general store, and church gathering throughout the territory. Victoria Pemberton received the information during her weekly social gathering, where the territory's most influential women assembled to discuss charitable works and, more importantly, to dissect the personal affairs of anyone who dared to step outside the boundaries of proper society. The silver tea service trembled slightly in her manicured hands as Eleanor Hayes delivered the shocking revelation with barely concealed excitement at being the bearer of such momentous news. Victoria's carefully controlled expression revealed nothing of the fury building beneath her polished exterior as she processed the implications of this unexpected development. For months she had been maneuvering to position herself as the obvious choice for James Harrison's eventual remarriage, using every social occasion to demonstrate her suitability as a stepmother to his boys and as a wife worthy of his substantial fortune and social standing. Her own widowhood had been managed with impeccable propriety, maintaining her late husband's political connections while expanding her influence through strategic charitable works and carefully cultivated friendships with the territory's most powerful families. The idea that James would choose Margaret Fletcher, a woman whose reputation had been thoroughly destroyed by her late husband's gambling scandals and financial irresponsibility, struck Victoria as not merely surprising but as a personal insult to everything she represented. Margaret's obvious poverty, her desperate circumstances, and her complete lack of social connections made her an incomprehensible choice for a man of James's stature and intelligence. The selection seemed to violate every principle of proper society that Victoria had spent years upholding and enforcing throughout the territory. Eleanor Hayes continued her breathless recitation of the details she had gathered from various sources throughout the town, each revelation more shocking than the last. The wedding was to take place within days, with minimal ceremony and virtually no advance planning, suggesting an unseemly haste that raised questions about the true nature of the relationship between the prospective bride and groom. Margaret had been seen moving her few possessions from her boarding house room to the Harrison Ranch, accompanied only by Mary Sullivan, whose own questionable associations made her an inappropriate companion for any respectable woman. The other ladies in Victoria's parlor exchanged meaningful glances as they absorbed the implications of such hasty arrangements, their whispered conversations creating an undercurrent of speculation that would spread throughout the territory's social networks within hours. Martha Coleman, the banker's wife, suggested that financial desperation might have driven Margaret to accept any offer of security, regardless of her true feelings toward her prospective husband. Dorothy Wright, whose family owned the largest mercantile establishment in town, wondered aloud whether James Harrison's judgment had been compromised by loneliness and his urgent need for someone to care for his motherless children. Victoria listened to these speculations with growing determination to prevent what she saw as a catastrophic mistake that would damage not only James Harrison's reputation but the entire social order that she had worked so hard to maintain. Her influence extended throughout the territory's most important institutions, from the church to the bank to the territorial government, and she began mentally cataloging the resources she could mobilize to expose the unsuitability of this proposed marriage. The thought of Margaret Fletcher presiding over the Harrison Ranch as its mistress, commanding the respect and deference that should rightfully belong to someone of Victoria's breeding and accomplishments, was absolutely intolerable. Meanwhile, Margaret herself was discovering the practical challenges of transforming from an impoverished widow into the future mistress of one of the territory's most substantial households. Martha Coleman, the ranch's longtime housekeeper, greeted her arrival with polite wariness that barely concealed deep reservations about the wisdom of her employer's sudden decision. The older woman had managed the domestic affairs of the Harrison Ranch for nearly 15 years, maintaining order and efficiency through the chaos of ranch life, the joy of the boys' births, and the devastating tragedy of their mother's death. Martha's concerns extended beyond simple resistance to change, rooted instead in genuine worry about the impact of this hasty marriage on the children she had helped raise from infancy. Timothy and Daniel had experienced enough disruption and loss in their young lives, and she feared that introducing another maternal figure who might prove temporary or unsuitable could cause additional emotional damage that would be difficult to repair. Her protective instincts toward the boys, combined with her loyalty to the memory of their beloved mother, created natural resistance to accepting any replacement, regardless of that person's qualifications or character. The ranch house itself presented Margaret with challenges she hadn't anticipated when accepting James's proposal, its vast rooms and complex domestic operations requiring skills and knowledge that her genteel education had never addressed. Managing a household staff, overseeing meal preparation for dozens of ranch hands, and coordinating the countless details of daily life on a working cattle operation demanded organizational abilities that went far beyond her experience as a governess or teacher. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her as she realized that failure in these domestic duties could undermine her position and jeopardize the security she had fought so hard to achieve. James, sensing her uncertainty without her needing to voice it, took time from his demanding schedule to introduce her to the ranch's operations and explain the routines that kept everything functioning smoothly. His patient guidance revealed the depth of his intelligence and the breadth of his responsibilities as he managed not only the cattle and land but also the complex web of relationships with suppliers, buyers, and the seasonal workers who helped during roundups and drives. Margaret found herself impressed by his ability to balance countless competing priorities while maintaining the respect and loyalty of men who had little patience for weakness or incompetence. The boys threw themselves into helping Margaret settle into her new role with enthusiasm that both touched her heart and increased her determination to succeed in this unprecedented arrangement. Timothy appointed himself as her guide to the ranch's geography, leading expeditions to show her the various pastures, water sources, and operational centers that comprised their extensive holdings. His knowledge of the land and animals impressed her with its thoroughness and practical application, revealing an intelligence that had been channeled into understanding his father's business rather than traditional academic subjects. Daniel, still shy but warming to Margaret's gentle encouragement, began sharing his own observations about ranch life with increasing confidence, demonstrating a natural curiosity about the world around him that had been stifled by his grief and isolation. His questions about animal behavior, plant identification, and weather patterns revealed a mind eager for knowledge and explanation. Qualities that Margaret recognized as the foundation for substantial educational achievement if properly nurtured and directed. The opportunity to shape such promising young minds filled her with purpose and excitement that made the challenges of her new position seem surmountable. The wedding ceremony itself took place in the ranch house parlor on a crisp October morning, attended only by the necessary witnesses and officiated by Father William Grant, whose kind demeanor couldn't quite hide his own reservations about the unusual circumstances surrounding the union. James had arranged everything with characteristic efficiency, ensuring that all legal requirements were met while avoiding the elaborate celebrations that neither he nor Margaret felt appropriate for their practical arrangement. The vows they exchanged were simple and traditional, but Margaret felt the weight of commitment in James's steady voice and hoped that her own responses conveyed the sincerity of her intentions. Victoria Pemberton's absence from the ceremony spoke volumes about her opinion of the proceedings, though she made her displeasure known through pointed comments to anyone willing to listen about the unseemly haste and questionable propriety of the entire arrangement. Her campaign of subtle disapproval began immediately, spreading through her extensive network of social connections like poison through clear water, questioning Margaret's suitability and suggesting that James Harrison's judgment had been compromised by desperation and loneliness rather than guided by wisdom and prudence. The first weeks of marriage brought unexpected moments of genuine warmth, alongside the inevitable awkwardness of strangers learning to share living space and daily routines. James proved to be a considerate husband, despite the businesslike nature of their arrangement, respecting Margaret's privacy while ensuring that she had everything necessary for her comfort and success in her new role. Their conversations over dinner revealed shared interests in literature and philosophy that surprised them both, creating connections that went beyond their practical partnership to suggest the possibility of real friendship and mutual respect.
Margaret's transformation of the boys' education began with subtle changes that addressed their individual needs and interests rather than imposing arbitrary academic requirements that had no connection to their daily experience. She introduced mathematical concepts through ranch management problems, taught geography through understanding of cattle markets and transportation routes, and encouraged reading through adventure stories and historical accounts that captured their imagination while expanding their knowledge. The results were immediately apparent as both boys began demonstrating enthusiasm for learning that had been completely absent during their experiences with previous teachers. Timothy's natural leadership abilities flourished under Margaret's guidance as she challenged him with increasingly complex problems that required both analytical thinking and practical application. His understanding of the ranch operations deepened as she helped him see the connections between different aspects of the business, from breeding decisions that would affect cattle quality to financial planning that ensured long-term sustainability. The confidence he gained through these intellectual challenges began transforming him from a rebellious boy, testing boundaries, into a young man preparing to take meaningful responsibility. Daniel's gradual emergence from his grief-imposed shell represented perhaps Margaret's greatest early success, as her patient encouragement and genuine interest in his thoughts and feelings helped him rediscover his natural curiosity about the world around him. The nature walks they took together became opportunities for scientific observation and philosophical discussion, as Margaret encouraged him to ask questions about everything from cloud formations to animal behavior. His artwork, which had been neglected since his mother's death, began flourishing again as Margaret provided both materials and encouragement for his creative expression. The domestic staff's initial resistance to Margaret's presence began softening as they observed the positive changes in the household atmosphere and the obvious improvement in the boys' happiness and behavior. Martha Coleman, while maintaining her protective vigilance, acknowledged that Margaret's influence had brought stability and purpose to daily routines that
Had been merely functional since the previous Mrs. Harrison's death. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of any changes to their well-established routines, found themselves impressed by Margaret's practical understanding of their work and her respect for their expertise and experience. However, Victoria Pemberton's campaign of social isolation and character assassination was gaining momentum throughout the territory's influential circles, as she used every opportunity to plant seeds of doubt about Margaret's true motivations and suitability for her elevated position. The whispered suggestions that desperation had driven Margaret to accept any offer of security, regardless of her true feelings, found receptive audiences among women who had their own reasons for resenting the sudden elevation of someone they considered their social inferior. The implication that Margaret was essentially a fortune hunter who had manipulated a grieving widower into an unsuitable marriage began spreading through parlors and social gatherings with the persistence of a persistent weed. These attacks on her character and motivations reached Margaret through various channels, as servants carrying gossip between households and merchants eager to share interesting news brought reports of the speculation surrounding her marriage and position in the community. The knowledge that her every action was being scrutinized for evidence of unworthiness or deception added pressure to her already challenging adjustment to ranch life and her responsibilities as stepmother to two emotionally vulnerable children. The fear that failure in any aspect of her new role could provide ammunition for her critics motivated her to work even harder to prove herself worthy of the trust James had placed in her. James, aware of the social currents swirling around his wife through his own network of business and personal relationships, found himself angry at the unfairness of the attacks being directed towards someone whose only crime had been accepting his proposal after being placed in desperate circumstances through no fault of her own. His protective instincts, dormant since his first wife's death, began stirring as he witnessed Margaret's determination to succeed, despite the obstacles being placed in her path by people who should have welcomed her into their community, rather than working to undermine her efforts. The boys, innocent of the adult politics surrounding their new family situation, continued to flourish under Margaret's care and guidance, providing daily evidence that James's decision had been correct regardless of social opinion or conventional expectations. Timothy's academic progress exceeded anything his previous teachers had achieved, while Daniel's emotional healing accelerated under the influence of someone who understood both his grief and his potential for growth and happiness. The transformation in both children was visible to anyone who spent time at the ranch, contradicting the narrative being spread by Margaret's critics about her unsuitability for maternal responsibilities. As autumn deepened into winter and Margaret's position in the household became more established, the foundation was being laid for conflicts that would test not only her determination and resilience, but also the strength of the unusual partnership she had formed with James Harrison. Victoria Pemberton's influence extended far beyond social disapproval into realms that could threaten the economic and legal foundations of everything Margaret had worked to build, while the boys' growing attachment to their new stepmother created emotional stakes that made failure increasingly unthinkable for everyone involved. The happiness that was beginning to emerge within the Harrison household stood in stark contrast to the storm clouds gathering in the territory's social and political circles, where powerful forces were aligning to challenge not only Margaret's position but the entire notion that worth and suitability could be measured by character and ability rather than breeding and social connections. The battle for Margaret's place in this world was entering a new phase, where the weapons would be influence and reputation rather than whispered gossip and social exclusion. Margaret's intelligence and education, which had once been viewed as threats to the established order, were about to become her greatest assets in a struggle that would determine not only her own future but the lives of the children who had come to depend on her guidance and love. The foundation of trust and mutual respect that she had built with James would soon be tested by pressures that neither of them had anticipated when they entered into their practical arrangement. While the boys' welfare hung in the balance of conflicts they were too young to understand but not too young to be damaged by their consequences. Winter's approach brought both the promise of quiet months for planning and preparation and the threat of isolation that could make the ranch vulnerable to whatever schemes Victoria Pemberton and her allies might devise during the long months when travel between properties became difficult and communication with the outside world grew sporadic. Margaret faced these approaching challenges with determination strengthened by her growing attachment to her new family and her increasing confidence in her ability to meet whatever obstacles might arise. While James found himself more committed to protecting what they had built together than he had expected when he first proposed their businesslike arrangement, the stage was set for confrontations that would test every assumption about worth, belonging, and the right to happiness that the characters held. While the harsh realities of frontier life and social expectations created pressure that could either strengthen the bonds forming between Margaret and her new family or shatter them completely under the weight of external opposition and internal doubt. The next phase of Margaret's journey would require all the courage, intelligence, and determination she possessed, as well as allies she had not yet recognized among people who valued character over convention and substance over social standing. The territorial winter descended upon Millbrook Valley with a ferocity that isolated the Harrison Ranch from the outside world for weeks at a time, creating a cocoon of forced intimacy that allowed Margaret to establish her place within the household without constant external scrutiny. The heavy snows that blocked the mountain passes and made travel treacherous also provided a natural barrier against Victoria Pemberton's campaign of social undermining, giving Margaret precious time to prove her worth through daily actions rather than having to defend against whispered accusations and pointed exclusions from community gatherings. During these months of isolation, Margaret discovered that managing a ranch household during winter required skills that no finishing school had ever taught, as she learned to coordinate the preservation of food supplies, the maintenance of equipment, and the care of both animals and people through the harsh months when supplies from town became irregular and emergency situations had to be handled with whatever resources were immediately available. The responsibility was both daunting and exhilarating, as she found herself making decisions that affected the welfare of dozens of people who depended on the ranch for their livelihood and security. Martha Coleman, initially resistant to accepting direction from someone she considered an outsider, gradually began recognizing Margaret's natural organizational abilities and her genuine concern for the welfare of everyone under the ranch's protection. The older woman's expertise in traditional household management, combined with Margaret's innovative approaches to education and problem-solving, created a partnership that improved efficiency while maintaining the warm family atmosphere that had been absent since the first Mrs. Harrison's death. Their collaboration became a model for the kind of mutual respect and shared purpose that Margaret hoped to establish throughout her new community. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of any woman's ability to understand their needs and challenges, found themselves impressed by Margaret's willingness to learn about their work and her practical suggestions for improving living conditions in the bunkhouse during the harsh winter months. Her background in natural sciences proved unexpectedly valuable as she helped diagnose and treat sick animals, drawing on her theoretical knowledge and combining it with the practical wisdom of experienced cattlemen to develop solutions that saved both livestock and money during the challenging season. Thomas Wright, the ranch foreman whose loyalty to James Harrison extended back more than a decade, became one of Margaret's most valuable allies, as he recognized her genuine desire to contribute to the ranch's success rather than simply enjoying the privileges of her position. His initial wariness gave way to respect as he observed her dedication to learning every aspect of the operation and her willingness to work alongside others rather than standing apart as a figure of authority without substance. Their professional relationship developed into something approaching friendship as they collaborated on planning improvements and solving problems that required both practical experience and innovative thinking. Timothy's education flourished under Margaret's guidance as she channeled his natural intelligence and leadership potential into projects that combined academic learning with practical ranch management skills. His mathematics improved dramatically when applied to calculating feed requirements, land usage, and breeding ratios, while his writing skills developed through correspondence with cattle buyers and suppliers that gave him real-world experience in business communication. The confidence he gained through these meaningful responsibilities transformed him from a resentful student into an eager participant in his own education. Daniel's artistic talents, dormant since his mother's death, began emerging again under Margaret's encouragement as she provided him with materials and techniques for capturing the beauty of the ranch landscape throughout the changing seasons. His detailed drawings of animals and plants became the foundation for scientific observation exercises that developed his powers of concentration and analytical thinking, while his emotional healing accelerated through the therapeutic process of creating beauty from his observations of the world around him. The shy, withdrawn boy gradually transformed into a confident young person, eager to share his discoveries and creations with others. James found himself experiencing emotions he hadn't expected when he proposed their practical arrangement, as Margaret's presence in his home brought warmth and intellectual stimulation that went far beyond his hopes for competent household management and child care. Their evening conversations over dinner expanded beyond discussions of daily ranch business to include literature, philosophy, and dreams for the future that revealed depths of compatibility he hadn't anticipated. The growing attraction he felt toward his wife surprised him with its intensity, while her obvious dedication to his children and her genuine interest in the ranch's success created bonds of respect and affection that transformed their marriage of convenience into something approaching genuine partnership. Margaret's own feelings toward James evolved from grateful respect to something warmer and more complex as she observed his fairness toward his workers, his devotion to his children, and his patient support of her efforts to establish herself in her new role. His physical presence began affecting her in ways that caught her off guard as she found herself noticing the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes, and the way his voice softened when he spoke to his sons. The possibility that their practical arrangement might develop into genuine love seemed increasingly real as winter progressed and their daily interactions revealed new dimensions of compatibility and mutual attraction. However, Victoria Pemberton's campaign against Margaret continued even during the winter months through carefully orchestrated correspondence with influential families throughout the territory, as she used her extensive network of social connections to spread doubts about Margaret's character and suitability for her elevated position. Letters carrying gossip and speculation traveled between households despite the difficult winter conditions, ensuring that Margaret's reputation continued to be undermined even during her period of relative isolation from direct social contact. The banking establishment, heavily influenced by Victoria's connections and her substantial deposits, began questioning the wisdom of extending credit and conducting business with someone whose background and motivations remained suspect in the eyes of proper society. Robert Mitchell, the bank manager whose own social aspirations made him particularly susceptible to Victoria's influence,
started suggesting to other businessmen that Margaret's sudden elevation might indicate poor judgment on James Harrison's part that could extend to his business decisions and financial management. Dr. Hayes, whose wife Eleanor had become one of Victoria's most devoted followers, found himself under pressure to support the narrative that Margaret's marriage represented a dangerous departure from proper social standards that could have far-reaching consequences for the entire community. His medical practice depended on maintaining good relationships with the territory's most influential families, creating conflicts between his professional obligations and his personal observations of Margaret's positive impact on the Harrison household. Father William Grant faced similar pressures as Victoria, and her allies questioned whether the church should continue to welcome someone whose rapid marriage and questionable background might indicate moral failings that could contaminate other parishioners. The priest's own observations of Margaret's character and her positive influence on the Harrison family conflicted with the growing pressure from his most prominent and generous congregants to distance himself from what they characterized as an unsuitable union that violated proper Christian standards of courtship and marriage. Meanwhile, Margaret remained largely unaware of the extent of the campaign being waged against her reputation throughout the territory's social and business networks. As the winter isolation protected her from direct confrontation while allowing her enemies to consolidate their opposition and plan more sophisticated attacks for the spring. Her focus on establishing herself within the ranch household and proving her worth through daily actions left her vulnerable to schemes being developed beyond her knowledge or ability to counter. The boys' obvious happiness and improvement under Margaret's care created the strongest evidence in her favor, but also heightened the stakes for those who opposed her presence in the community. Timothy's transformation from a rebellious, undisciplined child into a responsible young man with clear goals and strong values demonstrated the positive impact of Margaret's influence, while Daniel's emergence from grief-imposed withdrawal showed her ability to heal emotional wounds and nurture natural talents that had been suppressed by trauma and neglect. James's growing contentment and the obvious improvement in his household's atmosphere provided additional evidence that his decision to marry Margaret had been correct, regardless of social opinion or conventional expectations. His business relationships remained strong as his partners and suppliers recognized that his ranch operations continued to improve under the new domestic arrangements, contradicting suggestions that his judgment had been compromised by desperation or loneliness. The approaching spring would bring not only the return of regular communication and travel between properties, but also the first major test of Margaret's position in the community as social gatherings resumed and business relationships faced pressure from those who opposed her elevation to respectability. Victoria Pemberton's months of careful preparation would culminate in coordinated attacks designed to force Margaret back into social exile and demonstrate to other women the consequences of stepping outside their designated roles and expectations. Margaret's intelligence and education, combined with her growing confidence in her abilities and her deepening attachment to her new family, would soon face their greatest challenge as the forces arrayed against her moved from whispered gossip and social exclusion to more direct and potentially devastating attacks on her position and security. The foundation of trust and mutual respect she had built with James and the boys would provide strength for the coming battles. But success would require allies and resources she had not yet identified among the territory's complex web of relationships and competing interests. The stage was being set for confrontations that would determine not only Margaret's future but also the broader question of whether worth and suitability could triumph over breeding and social connections in a society still struggling to define its values and establish its identity. The happiness and stability she had created within the Harrison household represented more than personal success. It challenged fundamental assumptions about women's roles, social mobility, and the nature of marriage and family that resonated far beyond their immediate community. Spring's arrival would bring with it the resumption of social activities, business relationships, and community gatherings that had been suspended during the harsh winter months, forcing Margaret to defend her position in forums where Victoria Pemberton's influence had been carefully cultivated and strengthened during the months of preparation. The skills she had developed in managing ranch operations and educating the boys would prove invaluable in the coming struggles, but success would also require political acumen and social strategy that her sheltered background had not provided. The boys' continued development under Margaret's guidance created powerful evidence of her positive impact, but also made them potential targets for those who sought to undermine her position by attacking her effectiveness as a mother and educator. Their obvious love and respect for their stepmother would become both her greatest strength and her most vulnerable point as enemies sought ways to separate her from the children who had become the center of her world and the foundation of her identity in her new life. James's support and protection would prove crucial in the coming conflicts, but his own position in the community, while strong, was not immune to the kind of sustained attack that Victoria Pemberton and her allies were preparing to launch. The business relationships and social connections that supported his ranch operations could be threatened by campaigns that portrayed his marriage as evidence of poor judgment that might extend to his professional decisions and financial management. The approaching season would test every aspect of the new life Margaret had built, challenging not only her personal resilience and determination but also the strength of the relationships she had formed and the value of the contributions she had made to her new community. The battle for acceptance and respect was about to move from the private realm of household management and child care into the public arena of social standing and community recognition, where the stakes would be higher and the consequences of failure more devastating than anything she had yet faced. Winter's protection was ending, and with the spring thaw would come opportunities for both triumph and disaster that would determine whether Margaret's transformation from desperate widow to respected ranch wife would survive the full force of opposition from those who saw her success as a threat to everything they believed about proper society and women's appropriate roles within it. The foundation she had built during the months of isolation would soon face its ultimate test as private virtues met public challenges in a contest that would reshape not only her own destiny but the future of her adopted family and the community that had yet to fully accept her presence among its respectable members. The spring territorial social gathering arrived with all the pageantry and underlying tension that marked such events as battlegrounds where reputations were made or destroyed through careful observation and calculated conversation. Margaret stood before her wardrobe mirror, adjusting the emerald silk dress that James had insisted she purchase for the occasion, knowing that every detail of her appearance would be scrutinized by women who had spent months preparing their attacks on her character and position. The transformation from desperate widow to prosperous ranch wife was complete in material terms. But the true test lay in whether the community would accept what she had become or reject her as an impostor unworthy of her elevated status. James entered their bedroom as she fastened the pearl necklace that had belonged to his first wife, a gesture of acceptance and inclusion that touched Margaret more deeply than any expensive gift could have accomplished. His presence behind her in the mirror created an image of partnership and mutual support that she hoped would carry them through the evening's challenges. While his obvious pride in her appearance gave her confidence that their unusual beginning had developed into something genuinely meaningful for both of them. The months of shared responsibilities, intimate conversations, and growing attraction had transformed their practical arrangement into a marriage that satisfied both heart and mind in ways neither had dared to expect. Timothy and Daniel, dressed in their finest clothes and bursting with excitement about their first major social event since their mother's death, provided additional strength for Margaret as she contemplated the evening ahead. Their obvious love and respect for their stepmother had become the foundation of her identity in this new life, while their remarkable progress under her guidance offered irrefutable evidence of her positive impact on the family. The boys' transformation from grieving, undisciplined children into confident young people with clear goals and strong values represented her greatest achievement and her most powerful defense against those who questioned her suitability for her role. The territorial governor's mansion blazed with lights that could be seen for miles across the valley, its imposing architecture serving as a reminder of the political and social power that would be on display throughout the evening's festivities. Margaret's first glimpse of the gathering's scale and formality confirmed her suspicions that this event represented far more than simple social entertainment. As the territory's most influential families used such occasions to reinforce existing hierarchies and demonstrate their collective power to exclude or embrace newcomers seeking acceptance into their exclusive circles. Victoria Pemberton presided over the entrance hall like a queen holding court, her elaborate purple gown and magnificent jewelry creating an image of authority and sophistication that commanded immediate attention and deference from arriving guests. Her smile of greeting for James carried warmth that deliberately excluded Margaret, while her eyes assessed every detail of the younger woman's appearance with the calculating precision of a general studying enemy fortifications. The battle lines were clearly drawn from the moment they entered the mansion as Victoria's supporters positioned themselves to observe and participate in whatever confrontation might develop during the evening. Eleanor Hayes and Martha Coleman flanked Victoria like loyal lieutenants, their coordinated efforts to monopolize James's attention while pointedly ignoring Margaret's presence serving as early indicators of the sophisticated strategy that had been developed during the winter months of preparation. The subtle insults and calculated oversights that characterized their approach demonstrated a level of social warfare that Margaret's sheltered background had not prepared her to recognize or counter, leaving her feeling isolated and vulnerable despite James's protective presence at her side. Dr. Hayes approached their group with obvious reluctance, his professional obligations requiring him to maintain at least superficial politeness toward all community members, while his social aspirations made him reluctant to offend Victoria and her powerful allies. His stilted conversation and careful neutrality revealed the pressure he faced from competing loyalties, while his wife's pointed comments about the challenges of maintaining proper standards in frontier society carried implications that struck directly at Margaret's background and circumstances. The territorial banker Robert Mitchell engaged James in discussions of business matters that deliberately excluded Margaret from conversations about ranch operations and financial planning, reinforcing the traditional assumption that women should remain ignorant of such practical concerns regardless of their intelligence or education. His patronizing attitude toward Margaret's attempts to participate in discussions about cattle markets and land development revealed the broader resistance she faced from men who viewed her elevation as a threat to established gender roles and social expectations. Margaret's education and intellectual capabilities, which had initially impressed James and contributed to his decision to marry her, now became sources of suspicion and resentment among people who viewed such qualities as inappropriate for women and potentially dangerous to social stability. Her ability to discuss literature, philosophy, and scientific subjects with knowledge and insight that exceeded many of the men present created discomfort that manifested itself through subtle disapproval and deliberate exclusion from conversations where her contributions might embarrass less educated participants. Father William Grant's arrival at the gathering brought unexpected support for Margaret as the priest publicly acknowledged her positive influence on the Harrison family and her valuable contributions to the community through her educational work with the boys and her charitable assistance to ranch families facing difficulties. His moral authority carried weight that even Victoria Pemberton could not easily dismiss, while his detailed knowledge of Margaret's character and actions provided credible counter-narrative to the rumors and speculation that had been circulating throughout the territory's social networks. The revelation that Margaret had been quietly providing medical assistance to families throughout the valley during the harsh winter months, drawing on her scientific education to diagnose and treat conditions that might otherwise have proven fatal, created murmurs of surprise and grudging respect among guests who had previously dismissed her as an opportunistic fortune hunter.
Willingness to risk exposure to disease and harsh weather conditions to help people in need demonstrated a level of selfless service that contradicted the selfish motivations attributed to her by her critics. Timothy and Daniel's public presentation of a detailed scientific study they had completed under Margaret's guidance, documenting the ranch's wildlife populations and their ecological relationships, provided dramatic evidence of the educational achievements that had occurred under her supervision. The sophistication of their research methodology and the clarity of their presentations impressed even skeptical observers, while their obvious enthusiasm for learning and their mature behavior reflected the positive changes that Margaret's influence had brought to their development. James's passionate defense of his wife, when Victoria Pemberton finally launched her direct attack, questioning Margaret's moral character and suggesting that her marriage represented a calculated deception designed to secure financial advantage through manipulation of a grieving widower, marked the turning point of the evening's confrontations. His detailed recitation of Margaret's contributions to his family's happiness and his ranch's success, combined with his obvious anger at the unfairness of the attacks being directed toward her, demonstrated the genuine affection and respect that had developed between them during their months of marriage. The discovery that Victoria had been deliberately spreading false information about Margaret's background, including fabricated stories about her late husband's debts and her desperate circumstances prior to her marriage, began turning community opinion as people realized the extent of the deception and manipulation that had characterized the campaign against the Harrison family. Dr. Hayes's reluctant admission that he had been pressured to support accusations he knew to be false damaged Victoria's credibility and revealed the corrupt methods she had used to maintain her social dominance. Margaret's own response to the attacks surprised everyone present, including herself, as she drew on reserves of strength and dignity she hadn't known she possessed, to address the gathering with calm intelligence and unwavering moral authority. Her detailed account of her educational background, her explanation of the circumstances that had led to her marriage, and her passionate description of her love for her adopted children and her commitment to their welfare created a powerful counter-narrative that resonated with listeners who had been influenced by months of carefully orchestrated rumors and speculation. The territorial governor's unexpected intervention in the conflict, as he publicly praised Margaret's contributions to the community and expressed his administration's support for families that exemplified the values of hard work, education, and mutual support that the territory hoped to encourage among its citizens, effectively ended Victoria's campaign of social isolation and character assassination. His political authority carried weight that transcended social hierarchies, while his obvious respect for Margaret's intelligence and accomplishments provided official validation of her position in the community. The revelation that Margaret's late husband had been a victim of fraudulent business dealings rather than a compulsive gambler, information that had been deliberately suppressed by those who benefited from maintaining the false narrative about her circumstances, completed the transformation of community opinion as people realized the extent to which they had been manipulated into accepting lies about someone whose only crime had been surviving tragedy with dignity and courage. The evening's conclusion found Margaret surrounded by apologies and expressions of support from people who had previously shunned her, while Victoria Pemberton faced social isolation as her methods and motivations became clear to former allies who distanced themselves from her discredited campaign. The transformation was dramatic and complete, as Margaret's patient perseverance and quiet dignity ultimately triumphed over wealth and social connections that had been used for destructive rather than constructive purposes. James's public declaration of his love for his wife, spoken with such obvious sincerity and emotion that it moved many listeners to tears, provided the perfect conclusion to an evening that had begun with uncertainty and ended with triumph. His acknowledgement that their marriage had evolved from practical arrangement to genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and deep affection demonstrated the power of character and compatibility to create lasting happiness regardless of unconventional beginnings. The boys' obvious joy and pride in their stepmother's vindication reflected the secure family foundation that Margaret had worked so hard to establish, while their mature behavior throughout the evening's conflicts showed the positive influence of her guidance and education. Their transformation from grieving, troubled children into confident young people with strong values and clear goals provided the most powerful testimony to Margaret's success in her most important role. Margaret's final triumph came not through defeating her enemies, but through demonstrating that worth and character could ultimately overcome prejudice and social manipulation when supported by truth, perseverance, and the love of people who truly mattered. Her journey from desperate widow to respected community member had required courage, intelligence, and determination. But the foundation of genuine relationships and meaningful contributions had proved stronger than the forces arrayed against her. The spring gathering that had begun as a test of Margaret's acceptance in territorial society concluded with her position firmly established and her reputation restored to heights that exceeded even her most optimistic hopes. The community that had initially rejected her, based on circumstances beyond her control, now embraced her as an example of the values and qualities they hoped to encourage among all their members. While her enemies faced the consequences of their own choices to pursue destruction rather than understanding. James and Margaret's departure from the governor's mansion marked not the end of their struggles, but the beginning of a new chapter in their lives together. As they returned to their ranch with renewed confidence in their partnership and their place in the community they had fought so hard to join. The boys' chatter about the evening's events and their excitement about future social gatherings reflected the security and belonging that Margaret's perseverance had finally achieved for all of them. The transformation was complete in every sense that mattered, as Margaret had successfully evolved from an outcast surviving on the margins of society to a central figure in her community's social and cultural life, while maintaining the integrity and values that had sustained her through the darkest periods of her journey. Her marriage to James had begun as a practical solution to mutual problems, but had developed into a love story that inspired others and challenged conventional assumptions about the nature of successful relationships. The legacy of Margaret's struggle and ultimate triumph extended far beyond her personal happiness, as her example encouraged other women facing difficult circumstances to believe in their own worth and potential for creating meaningful lives despite social barriers and economic constraints. Her success in combining traditional domestic roles with intellectual pursuits and community leadership provided a model for future generations of women seeking to expand their opportunities and influence within established social structures. 2 years had passed since the territorial gathering that marked Margaret's complete acceptance into Millbrook Valley society, and the Harrison Ranch had become the unofficial center of cultural and educational activity for the entire region. The schoolhouse that Margaret had established on their property now served children from 6 neighboring counties. Its innovative teaching methods and remarkable success stories drawing visitors from as far away as Denver and Colorado Springs, who came to observe and learn from her revolutionary approach to frontier education. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the expanded schoolhouse as Margaret worked with her advanced students on a complex mathematics problem that combined theoretical principles with practical ranch management applications. Timothy, now 14 and serving as her assistant teacher, demonstrated the same patient guidance and natural authority that she had once used to help him overcome his academic struggles. His transformation from rebellious child to responsible young educator exemplified the kind of personal growth that had become characteristic of students who experienced Margaret's unique blend of intellectual challenge and emotional support. Daniel, at 10, had emerged as one of the territory's most promising young artists, his detailed botanical illustrations appearing in scientific journals published in eastern cities where his work was praised by university professors who had no idea that the creator was a frontier child, educated by a former governess who had once been dismissed as socially unacceptable. His artistic talents had developed alongside his scientific curiosity, creating a combination of skills that promised remarkable achievements in whatever field he eventually chose to pursue. James stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, watching his wife work with the kind of quiet pride that had replaced his initial surprise at discovering the depth of her capability and the breadth of her influence on their community. Their marriage had evolved far beyond the practical arrangement he had originally envisioned, developing into a partnership that combined passionate love with shared intellectual interests and complementary strengths that made them formidable allies in every aspect of their lives together. The ranch itself had prospered under their joint management, as Margaret's scientific approach to animal husbandry and James's practical experience in cattle operations created innovations that increased productivity while maintaining the high standards of animal welfare that had become their trademark throughout the territory. Their breeding program had produced cattle that commanded premium prices in eastern markets, while their humane treatment methods had influenced ranching practices throughout the region as other operations sought to duplicate their success. Martha Coleman, now Margaret's closest friend and trusted confidant,
supervised the domestic staff with the same efficiency that had characterized her work for decades, but with an enthusiasm and sense of purpose that reflected the positive atmosphere Margaret had created throughout the household. The older woman's initial resistance to change had been replaced by genuine admiration for someone whose character and abilities had proved themselves through daily demonstration rather than social credentials or inherited position. Thomas Wright had become more than a ranch foreman, evolving into a business partner whose profit-sharing arrangement with James reflected the increased prosperity that had resulted from implementing many of Margaret's suggestions for improving operational efficiency and expanding market opportunities. His loyalty to the Harrison family had deepened as he witnessed the positive changes that Margaret's presence had brought to every aspect of ranch life. From worker satisfaction to community relationships, the territorial capital had officially recognized Margaret's educational innovations by appointing her as the regional supervisor of rural schools, a position that gave her authority over curriculum development and teacher training throughout Colorado Territory. Her influence extended far beyond Millbrook Valley, as teachers from dozens of communities sought her guidance in implementing methods that addressed the unique challenges of frontier education, while maintaining academic standards that prepared students for success in an increasingly complex world. Dr. Hayes had become one of Margaret's strongest supporters, his medical practice now incorporating many of the scientific principles and research methodologies that she had introduced to the community through her educational programs and practical demonstrations. His wife, Eleanor, once a devoted follower of Victoria Pemberton's social campaign, had transformed into an enthusiastic advocate for women's education and intellectual development, using her influence to support other women seeking to expand their roles beyond traditional domestic boundaries. Father William Grant's church had become a center for community discussions about social progress and educational advancement, as the priest used Margaret's success story to challenge his congregation's assumptions about worth, potential, and the importance of recognizing hidden talents in unexpected places. His sermons frequently referenced the biblical principle that gifts and abilities should be developed and used for the benefit of all, regardless of the social circumstances of those who possess them. The territorial governor had appointed James to serve on the state constitutional convention that would determine Colorado's laws and institutions when statehood was achieved, while Margaret's expertise in education had earned her a position as advisor on matters related to public schooling and women's rights. Their combined influence extended far beyond their local community as they worked to establish policies that would create opportunities for future generations of settlers seeking to build meaningful lives in the developing territories. Victoria Pemberton had largely withdrawn from public life after her campaign against Margaret backfired so dramatically, her influence and social standing severely damaged by revelations about her methods and motivations that had permanently altered her reputation throughout the territory. The isolation she now experienced served as a powerful reminder to others about the consequences of using social position to destroy rather than build. While her example encouraged more constructive approaches to community leadership and influence, Robert Mitchell had been forced to resign his position at the bank after investigations revealed financial irregularities connected to his support of Victoria's schemes. His career destroyed by his willingness to compromise professional ethics in service of social ambitions that proved both misguided and ultimately self-destructive. His replacement, a younger man with progressive ideas about women's financial capabilities, had established policies that recognized Margaret and other women as competent business partners rather than merely decorative appendages to their husbands' affairs. The ranch's success had enabled James and Margaret to establish a scholarship fund that provided educational opportunities for promising students whose families lacked the financial resources to support advanced learning, creating pathways for children from humble backgrounds to achieve their potential regardless of economic circumstances. The program had already produced doctors, teachers, engineers, and business leaders who carried Margaret's educational philosophy into their own careers and communities. Margaret's personal library had grown into one of the most comprehensive collections of scientific, literary, and educational materials west of the Mississippi River, serving as a resource not only for her own students but for researchers and scholars from universities throughout the country who came to study her innovative teaching methods and their remarkable results. The intellectual atmosphere she had created at the ranch attracted visitors who contributed their own knowledge and expertise, while learning from her unique approach to combining theoretical education with practical application. The boys' continued development under Margaret's guidance had exceeded even James's most optimistic expectations, as both young men displayed the kind of character, intelligence, and sense of responsibility that promised distinguished futures in whatever fields they chose to pursue. Timothy's natural leadership abilities had been channeled into student government activities and community service projects that demonstrated his commitment to using his privileges and advantages for the benefit of others. While Daniel's artistic and scientific talents had attracted attention from prestigious institutions eager to nurture his exceptional abilities, James and Margaret's own relationship had deepened with each passing season, their initial attraction and respect developing into a love that encompassed intellectual partnership, emotional intimacy, and shared commitment to family and community that made them a formidable team in every aspect of their lives. Their example had influenced other couples throughout the territory as they demonstrated that marriages based on mutual respect and complementary strengths could achieve happiness and success that exceeded unions founded solely on romantic passion or social convenience. The community that had once rejected Margaret based on prejudice and social pressure now looked to her for leadership and guidance on issues ranging from education and child rearing to business development and civic improvement. Her influence extending into every aspect of local life through the respect and trust she had earned through consistent demonstration of wisdom, compassion, and practical competence. Her transformation from outcast to community leader had become a source of inspiration for others facing similar challenges and obstacles. Margaret's daily routine now included correspondence with educators, politicians, and social reformers throughout the nation who sought her insights on issues related to frontier development, women's rights, and educational innovation. Her influence extending far beyond the boundaries of Colorado Territory as her ideas and methods gained recognition in academic and political circles. The desperate widow who had once clutched 50 cents as her only security now commanded respect and attention from some of the most powerful and influential people in the country. The ranch house itself had been expanded and renovated to accommodate the constant stream of visitors who came to observe Margaret's educational programs, study her methods, and seek her advice on implementing similar approaches in their own communities. While the guest quarters had become a virtual conference center where important discussions about social progress and educational reform took place on a regular basis. The isolation that had once characterized frontier life had been replaced by a network of relationships and communications that connected their remote location to centers of learning and influence throughout the nation. The success of Margaret's educational programs had inspired the territorial government to establish a teacher training college based on her methods and principles, with Margaret serving as the founding director of an institution that would prepare educators for service throughout the developing territories and states. Her influence on educational policy and practice promised to extend far beyond her own lifetime as generations of teachers carried her innovations and philosophy into community. Across the expanding nation, the transformation was complete in every meaningful sense, as Margaret had not only achieved personal happiness and security, but had created lasting institutions and influenced countless lives in ways that would continue benefiting future generations long after her own direct involvement ended. Her journey from desperate circumstances to regional influence demonstrated the power of perseverance, character, and intelligence to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles while creating positive change that extended far beyond individual success. James's pride in his wife's achievements was matched by his gratitude for the completeness she had brought to his own life and the lives of his sons. As Margaret's presence had transformed their house into a true home while expanding their influence and opportunities in ways he had never imagined possible. When he first made his practical proposal, their partnership had proved that unconventional beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes when based on mutual respect, shared values, and commitment to using their advantages for the benefit of others. The legacy of Margaret's struggle and ultimate triumph had become part of the territory's founding mythology, inspiring stories and examples that would be passed down to future generations as evidence that worth and ability could overcome prejudice and social barriers when supported by determination, integrity, and the courage to persist in the face of opposition and doubt. Her success had opened doors for other women while demonstrating that traditional gender roles could be expanded without abandoning family responsibilities or community obligations. The evening sun painted the ranch buildings in golden light as Margaret stood on the porch of their home, surrounded by her family and looking out over the land that had become the foundation of their prosperity and influence, knowing that their work together had created something lasting and meaningful that would continue growing and developing long after they were gone. The desperate widow who had once faced an uncertain future with nothing but her education and determination had become a force for positive change, whose influence extended throughout the developing territories and promised to shape the future of American education and women's opportunities for generations to come. The autumn of 1890 brought unexpected visitors to the Harrison Ranch in the form of a delegation from Harvard University. Their arrival in two elegant carriages creating quite a stir among the ranch hands who had grown accustomed to distinguished guests but had never seen such obvious academic authority arrive at their remote Colorado location. Professor Edmund Whitmore, the university's Dean of Educational Studies, stepped down from the lead carriage with the careful dignity of a man unaccustomed to frontier travel, his formal attire and precise manner contrasting sharply with the rugged landscape that surrounded him. Margaret received the delegation in the main parlor of the ranch house, her composure masking the excitement she felt at this recognition from one of America's most prestigious academic institutions. The professors had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to observe her educational methods firsthand, and to discuss a proposal that could revolutionize higher education for women throughout the nation. Their interest in her work represented validation from the highest levels of American scholarship, confirming that her innovations had transcended regional boundaries to gain national recognition. Professor Whitmore's opening remarks revealed the true scope of their mission, as he explained that Harvard's governing board had authorized him to offer Margaret a position as the first female professor in the university's history, with the responsibility of establishing a new department of frontier education that would train teachers for service in the developing territories and states. The offer included a substantial salary, housing in Cambridge, and the resources to develop curriculum that would be adopted by universities throughout the country. The proposal represented everything Margaret had ever dreamed of in terms of academic recognition and professional opportunity. Yet her response surprised the distinguished visitors as she requested time to consider the implications for her family and community before making such a momentous decision. Her primary concern centered on Timothy and Daniel, now 16 and 12 respectively, whose education and emotional well-being remained her highest priority despite the extraordinary opportunities that beckoned from the east. James listened to the professor's presentation with mixed emotions, torn between pride in his wife's achievements and concern about the potential disruption to the life they had built together in Colorado. Their partnership had become so integral to both his personal happiness and his business success that the prospect of separation, even temporary, created anxiety about maintaining the ranch operations and preserving the family stability that Margaret had worked so hard to establish. Timothy's reaction to the Harvard offer demonstrated the maturity and selflessness that Margaret's guidance had instilled in him, as he immediately urged her to accept the position despite his own reluctance to leave the ranch and the community where he had found his place and purpose. His insistence that such an opportunity was too important to refuse for personal considerations reflected the broader perspective and commitment to education that had become central to his identity under Margaret's influence. Daniel's artistic sensibilities made him more attuned to the emotional implications of the decision, as he understood intuitively that accepting the Harvard position would require sacrifices and adjustments that could fundamentally alter the family dynamics that had provided security and inspiration for his creative development. His quiet plea for the family to remain together revealed the deep bonds that Margaret's patient nurturing had created among all the household members. The professor's week-long stay at the ranch provided them with comprehensive exposure to Margaret's educational innovations, as they observed her teaching methods, studied her curriculum materials, and interviewed students whose achievements exceeded anything they had encountered in traditional academic settings. Their growing amazement at the sophistication and effectiveness of her programs confirmed that her methods represented genuine breakthroughs in educational theory and practice. Dr. Catherine Morrison, the delegation's only female member and a pioneering researcher in child development, became particularly fascinated by Margaret's integration of practical skills with theoretical knowledge, recognizing that this approach addressed fundamental limitations in traditional education that separated learning from real-world application. Her detailed notes and enthusiastic observations would later form the basis for educational reforms that influenced teaching methods throughout American universities and schools. The ranch's success under James and Margaret's joint management provided additional evidence of her practical abilities and business acumen. As the professors observed the efficient operations, innovative breeding programs, and progressive labor practices that had made their property a model for agricultural development throughout the territory. The combination of academic excellence and practical competence impressed the Harvard visitors as evidence that intellectual achievement need not be divorced from real-world effectiveness. Margaret's extensive correspondence with educators, politicians, and social reformers throughout the nation revealed the breadth of her influence and the respect she commanded among America's intellectual and political leaders,
Many of whom had sought her advice on issues ranging from women's rights to territorial development. The professors realized that they were not simply recruiting a talented teacher, but gaining access to a network of relationships and influences that could enhance Harvard's own standing and effectiveness. The emotional complexity of the decision deepened when Margaret discovered that accepting the Harvard position would also provide opportunities for Timothy and Daniel to receive educational advantages that were simply not available in frontier Colorado. Despite the excellent foundation she had provided for their academic development, the prospect of exposing them to the cultural and intellectual resources of Cambridge created compelling arguments for accepting the offer despite the personal sacrifices it would require. James's business partners and community leaders organized an unprecedented gathering to discuss the implications of Margaret's potential departure, recognizing that her influence had become so integral to the region's educational and cultural development that her absence could significantly impact the territory's progress towards statehood and social advancement. Their collective plea for her to remain demonstrated the extent to which her work had transcended individual success to become essential to community welfare. The territorial governor's urgent telegram expressing concern about losing Margaret's expertise and requesting a meeting to discuss alternatives revealed the political implications of her decision, as her departure could weaken Colorado's chances for immediate statehood by removing one of its most compelling examples of educational and social progress. The governor's offer of a substantial increase in her territorial salary and expanded authority represented official recognition of her importance to the region's future. Victoria Pemberton's unexpected visit to the ranch, Her first social contact with Margaret since the disasters that had destroyed her own influence and reputation provided a poignant reminder of how completely their positions had reversed since that desperate day when Margaret first sought employment as a governess. The older woman's humble request for forgiveness and her acknowledgement of Margaret's superior character and abilities represented a personal vindication that surpassed any professional recognition. The solution that eventually emerged from weeks of discussion and negotiation reflected the innovative thinking and collaborative approach that had characterized Margaret's methods throughout her career. As Harvard agreed to establish a satellite program at the Harrison Ranch that would bring distinguished faculty to Colorado for extended residencies while allowing Margaret to maintain her family obligations and community commitments. The arrangement would create the first university extension program in American history, with Margaret serving as director of a pioneering experiment in distributed higher education. The announcement of this revolutionary arrangement created excitement throughout the academic world, as universities from coast to coast recognized the potential for extending their influence and effectiveness through similar programs that brought advanced education to remote communities, while preserving the local connections and practical applications that made frontier education so valuable. Margaret's innovation promised to transform American higher education by demonstrating that excellence and accessibility need not be mutually exclusive. The construction of a proper university facility on the ranch grounds began immediately, with generous funding from Harvard combined with contributions from territorial governments and private donors who recognized the historical significance of this educational experiment. The building would house not only classrooms and laboratories but also residential facilities for visiting faculty and a library that would rival many established universities in its scope and quality. Timothy's appointment as the program's first student assistant reflected his exceptional preparation under Margaret's guidance, while also providing him with opportunities for advanced study that would prepare him for leadership roles in whatever field he eventually chose to pursue. His combination of practical ranch experience and sophisticated academic preparation made him uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between theoretical education and real-world application. Daniel's artistic talents found new outlets through collaborations with visiting professors who recognized his exceptional abilities and provided him with advanced training in techniques and concepts that would have been impossible to access in frontier Colorado. His work began appearing in Eastern art journals and exhibitions, establishing his reputation as a significant talent whose frontier background provided unique perspectives on American landscape and culture. James's role in the new educational venture expanded his influence beyond ranching into educational policy and territorial development, as his practical wisdom and business acumen proved invaluable in managing the complex logistics of the university extension program. His partnership with Margaret had evolved to encompass not only personal and family matters but also professional collaboration that enhanced both their individual capabilities and their combined impact. The program's first semester exceeded every expectation as students from throughout the territories traveled to Colorado to experience the innovative combination of advanced academic instruction with practical frontier application that characterized Margaret's approach to education. The waiting list for admission grew to include applicants from established Eastern families who recognized that this unique educational opportunity offered advantages that traditional universities could not provide. Margaret's influence on American education had become so significant that her methods and innovations were being studied and implemented in universities throughout the nation. While her correspondence with international educators began attracting attention from European institutions interested in learning from American frontier educational experiments. The desperate widow who had once faced an uncertain future with nothing but determination and education had become one of the most influential figures in American intellectual life. The success of the Harvard Extension program led to similar arrangements with other prestigious universities, creating a network of advanced educational opportunities that transformed Colorado Territory from an academic backwater into a center of innovative teaching and learning that attracted scholars and students from throughout the world. Margaret's vision of combining theoretical excellence with practical application had created a new model for American higher education. The ranch that had provided sanctuary for a desperate widow seeking employment had become a destination for some of America's most distinguished intellectuals, while the family that had formed around practical necessity had evolved into a center of influence that shaped educational policy and social progress throughout the nation. The transformation represented not only personal triumph but also evidence of America's capacity for social mobility and innovation. Margaret's legacy extended far beyond her individual achievements to encompass the countless lives she had influenced through her teaching. The educational innovations she had pioneered and the social barriers she had overcome through persistence, character, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Her journey from social outcast to national influence demonstrated that worth and ability could triumph over prejudice and circumstance when supported by determination, integrity, and the courage to persist despite opposition and doubt. The evening light painted the ranch buildings and university facilities in golden hues as Margaret stood surrounded by her family and colleagues, looking out over the land that had provided the foundation for achievements that exceeded her wildest dreams during those desperate months when survival itself seemed uncertain. The transformation was complete in every sense that mattered, as personal happiness had been combined with professional fulfillment and social impact that would influence American education and women's opportunities for generations to come. The crisp morning air of December 1895 carried the sound of construction hammers and voices speaking in multiple languages as workers from across the nation labored to complete the Margaret Harrison Institute for Advanced Learning, a magnificent stone and timber complex that would serve as the permanent headquarters for what had become the most innovative educational experiment in American history. The building rose from the Colorado prairie like a monument to the power of vision and determination, its Gothic Revival architecture symbolizing the marriage of Old World scholarly tradition with New World practical innovation that defined Margaret's revolutionary approach to higher education. Senator James Harrison stood beside his wife on the construction platform that would soon become the Institute's ceremonial entrance, his weathered rancher's hands now equally comfortable holding legislative documents as they once were with cattle ropes and branding irons. His appointment to represent Colorado in the United States Senate had surprised no one who understood the depth of respect he commanded throughout the territory. While his partnership with Margaret had created a political dynasty built on progressive values and practical wisdom that influenced national policy on education, women's rights, and territorial development, Margaret herself had been transformed by a decade of unprecedented success and recognition into one of America's most influential public figures, her opinions sought by presidents and her educational theories studied in universities from Harvard to Oxford. Yet the essential qualities that had enabled her survival during those desperate early months remained unchanged. As her genuine concern for individual students and her commitment to practical application continued to define her approach to even the most prestigious academic and political opportunities. Timothy Harrison, now 21 and recently graduated summa cum laude from Princeton University, had returned to Colorado to assume leadership responsibilities for the educational institute that bore his stepmother's name. His senior thesis on the integration of scientific agriculture with liberal arts education had earned recognition from academic institutions throughout the nation, while his obvious dedication to continuing Margaret's innovative work promised that her influence would extend through future generations of educators and leaders. Daniel Harrison's artistic career had flourished beyond anyone's expectations, his paintings and sculptures earning critical acclaim in New York, Paris, and London galleries where his unique perspective on American frontier life commanded substantial prices from collectors eager to own works by the artist whose frontier upbringing had provided such distinctive insights into the American experience. His success had opened doors for other Western artists while demonstrating that cultural sophistication could flourish in unexpected environments when nurtured by education and opportunity. The Institute's faculty now included some of America's most distinguished scholars, men and women who had abandoned prestigious positions at established universities to participate in the educational revolution that Margaret had initiated on a remote Colorado ranch. Their presence attracted students from around the world who sought exposure to teaching methods that combined rigorous academic standards with practical application in ways that traditional institutions had been unable to achieve.
Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, Margaret's closest academic colleague and the Institute's Dean of Curriculum Development, had collaborated with her in producing a series of textbooks that revolutionized American education by demonstrating how theoretical knowledge could be integrated with practical skills without compromising intellectual rigor. Their methods had been adopted by hundreds of schools and universities, creating a generation of students whose education prepared them for effective leadership in an increasingly complex industrial society. The railroad spur that now connected the Institute directly to the main transcontinental line brought a constant stream of visitors who came to observe Margaret's teaching methods, study her curriculum innovations, and seek her advice on educational and social policy matters that affected communities throughout the developing nation. The isolation that had once characterized frontier life had been replaced by connections and influences that extended Margaret's impact far beyond the boundaries of Colorado. President Grover Cleveland's correspondence with Margaret on matters of national educational policy reflected the extent to which her expertise had gained recognition at the highest levels of American government, while her informal advisory role on issues affecting women and children had made her one of the most influential figures in progressive political circles. Her journey from social outcast to presidential advisor represented a transformation that exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of those who had supported her during her struggles for acceptance and recognition. The Institute's research programs had produced innovations in agriculture, education, and social welfare that influenced policy and practice throughout the American territories and states, while Margaret's students had become leaders in fields ranging from politics and business to science and the arts. The practical emphasis of her educational philosophy had created graduates whose ability to combine theoretical knowledge with real-world application made them exceptionally effective in whatever careers they chose to pursue. The town of Millbrook Valley had grown into a substantial city largely because of the economic and cultural impact of the Educational Institute, with businesses, cultural institutions, and government offices establishing operations to serve the needs of students, faculty, and visitors from throughout the nation and beyond. The community that had once questioned Margaret's suitability for respectable society now celebrated her as their most distinguished citizen and the architect of their prosperity and prominence. Victoria Pemberton's final years had been spent in quiet obscurity, her influence and wealth gradually diminished by the social and economic changes that Margaret's success had helped to create throughout the territory. Her death the previous winter had passed almost unnoticed except by Margaret, who ensured that she received a dignified funeral despite the isolation that had characterized her final decades, demonstrating the forgiveness and compassion that had become hallmarks of Margaret's character. The Institute's library had become one of the finest research collections west of the Mississippi River, its holdings encompassing not only traditional academic subjects but also extensive materials on frontier development, women's studies, and innovative educational theory that attracted scholars from universities throughout the world. The collection reflected Margaret's belief that true education required access to diverse perspectives and comprehensive information rather than narrow specialization that ignored broader contexts and applications. Margaret's own scholarly publications had established her as one of America's leading educational theorists, her books and articles translated into multiple languages and studied in universities throughout Europe and Asia where educators sought to understand and adapt her innovative methods to their own cultural and social contexts. The desperate widow who had once possessed nothing but education and determination had become an international authority whose ideas influenced educational policy and practice on multiple continents. The Institute's agricultural research programs had revolutionized farming and ranching throughout the American West, as scientists working under Margaret's direction developed techniques that increased productivity while preserving environmental sustainability in ways that ensured long-term prosperity for agricultural communities. The combination of scientific method with practical application that characterized all of Margaret's work had produced innovations that influenced agricultural practice throughout the nation. James's political career had been built on the foundation of progressive principles and practical wisdom that his partnership with Margaret had helped him develop. As his Senate speeches on education, women's rights, and territorial development gained national attention and influenced legislation that shaped American policy for decades. Their collaboration had created a political partnership that multiplied their individual effectiveness while demonstrating the potential for shared leadership based on mutual respect and complementary strengths. The Institute's teacher training programs had produced educators who carried Margaret's innovative methods into schools and communities throughout America, creating a network of influence that extended her impact far beyond her direct teaching and administration. The multiplier effect of training teachers who would themselves train other teachers ensured that Margaret's educational philosophy would continue influencing American education long after her direct involvement ended. International delegations arrived regularly at the Institute to study Margaret's methods and adapt them for use in their own countries. As educators from Japan, Germany, England, and other nations recognized that her innovations addressed universal challenges in combining theoretical education with practical preparation for productive citizenship. The ranch that had provided refuge for a desperate widow had become a destination for some of the world's most distinguished educational leaders. Margaret's influence on women's rights and opportunities had extended far beyond her personal success to encompass systematic efforts to expand educational and professional opportunities for women throughout American society. As she used her position and influence to advocate for policies and practices that would enable other women to develop and utilize their talents and abilities. Her example had inspired countless women, while her active advocacy had helped create institutional changes that benefited future generations. The Institute's impact on Colorado's successful bid for statehood had been substantial, as the educational and cultural institutions that Margaret had created provided compelling evidence of the territory's readiness for full participation in the American political system. The intellectual sophistication and practical competence that characterized the Institute's programs demonstrated that frontier communities could achieve cultural and educational excellence that rivaled established Eastern institutions. The success of Margaret's educational innovations had attracted attention from progressive political leaders who recognized that her methods could address national challenges in preparing citizens for effective participation in an increasingly complex democratic society. While her emphasis on combining theoretical knowledge with practical skills offered solutions to problems that traditional educational approaches had failed to resolve effectively. The Institute's extension programs had brought advanced educational opportunity to remote communities throughout the American West. As traveling faculty members carried Margaret's innovative teaching methods to students who would otherwise have had no access to higher education. The democratization of educational opportunity that resulted from these programs reflected Margaret's commitment to ensuring that geographic isolation and economic circumstances would not prevent talented individuals from developing their potential. Margaret's legacy had become inseparable from the broader story of American educational and social progress, as her journey from desperate circumstances to national influence demonstrated the potential for individual achievement to create systematic change that benefited entire communities and future generations. Her success had challenged fundamental assumptions about women's capabilities while providing practical examples of how barriers could be overcome through persistence, competence, and unwavering commitment to excellence. The evening ceremony that would officially dedicate the Margaret Harrison Institute for Advanced Learning brought together some of America's most distinguished political, academic, and cultural leaders, their presence testifying to the national significance of Margaret's achievements and the continuing influence of her educational innovations. The desperate widow who had once faced an uncertain future with nothing but determination and education had created institutions and influenced policies that would shape American society for generations to come. As Margaret stood before the assembled crowd of dignitaries, students, faculty, and community members who had gathered to celebrate the completion of her life's work, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from social exile to national recognition while never losing sight of the individual students whose lives she had touched and the practical problems her innovations had been designed to solve. The transformation was complete in every sense that mattered, representing not only personal triumph but also evidence of America's capacity for social mobility and institutional innovation. The future stretched ahead with promise and possibility as the Institute prepared to expand its influence through new programs, additional campuses, and continuing innovations that would extend Margaret's educational philosophy to address emerging challenges and opportunities in American society. While the foundation she had built ensured that her legacy would continue growing and evolving long after her direct involvement ended. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.